Most founders obsess over building their product first, but here's the truth. Your biggest constraint isn't the product. Before you worry about MVPs, teams, or funding, you need to solve one thing. How long can you survive while figuring the rest out? I call this your minimum viable runway, and it's the key difference between founders who succeed and those who burn out. Take Steve, a founder who freelanced during the day and worked on his virtual reality startup at night. He was burning out. But once he focused on building his runway first, he landed $180,000 in committed revenue in just 4 weeks without writing a single line of code. In the next 12 minutes, I'll walk you through a simple step-by-step method to build your runway like Steve and tell you the one key metric that predicts startup success better than almost anything else. Hi there, if you're new to this channel, my name is Maurya. I'm an entrepreneur and author and the creator of the popular one-page business modeling tool, Lean Canvas, used by millions of founders around the world. I bootstrapped every product I built, from my first startup that I sold to my books to Lean Foundry, our business model education platform. And through working with thousands of founders, I've identified the one metric that separates successful bootstrappers from those who never make it past the idea stage. It's not revenue, it's not users, it's not even product market fit. It's what I call your minimum viable runway. And most founders get this completely backwards. Let me start with the harsh reality. 90% of bootstrap startups fail not because they build the wrong product, but because they run out of runway before they figure out what the right product is. Here's the typical founder story. A founder has a great idea for a product, they quit their day job, spend 8 months building, and launch to crickets. They then pivot 3 times over the next 18 months and are forced to go back to their day job because they've exhausted their savings. Most founders focus on their minimum viable product when they should really focus on their minimum viable runway. And here's what makes this even more critical today. The funding landscape has completely shifted. A decade ago, investors funded product development and IP. Today, investors only fund traction. They expect you to already have a working product, paying customers, and proven unit economics before they'll even take a meeting. This means you can't rely on external funding to figure out your business model. You need to build enough runway to systematically validate and iterate your way to traction first. I learned this lesson the expensive way across 2 failed products. I launched one of my first early products, BoxCloud, using a freemium model and focused obsessively on user growth. We got thousands of users, but I learned a painful lesson. Free users you can't monetize doesn't qualify as traction. So with my next product, Cloudfire, I was smarter about charging from day one. This time we had 500 paying customers and great reviews, and I felt like we were killing it. But when we did the math, we discovered we needed 20,000 customers to build a real business. At a 1% conversion rate, that meant 2 million leads. The unit economics at that point for that model were near impossible. That's when the minimum viable runway concept crystallized for me. BoxCloud taught me that users don't equal revenue, and Cloudfire taught me that revenue doesn't equal a sustainable business model. What matters is, can your business model systematically generate enough revenue to fund your learning and growth? Both startups failed that runway test. On the one hand, BoxCloud couldn't generate enough revenue from users. While Cloudfire could generate revenue, it couldn't generate enough to build a sustainable business model. That insight completely changed how I think about pricing, business models, and customer validation. So what exactly is a minimum viable runway? It's the minimum amount of monthly recurring revenue needed to cover your basic survival costs while you systematically validate and build your business. A good rule of thumb I use is $10,000 in monthly recurring revenue per founder. Now, if you live in a different part of the world, your number may be higher or lower. What's important isn't the exact number, but what that number allows you to do. A good minimum viable runway number isn't arbitrary. It's the magic number that lets you quit your day job and focus 100% on your startup. Below this threshold, you're still part-time. Above it, you can take the leap and go all in on building out your business. Without a minimum viable runway, most founders are forced to work part-time on their startup while maintaining a day job or consulting work. That divided attention is more than just inconvenient, it's often a startup killer. The reason for that is you can't iterate fast enough, you can't respond to customer needs quickly enough, and you definitely can't compete against founders who are working on their startup full-time. Your minimum viable runway should cover basic living expenses, some business costs, and give you breathing room to run experiments without the panic of an empty bank account. More importantly, it gives you the freedom to think strategically instead of just surviving. Now, if you're like most people, you're probably wondering, how do you build a minimum viable runway without first building a working minimum viable product? This isn't a chicken and egg problem. This is where most founders get it wrong. They think they need to build a product first and then get customers to generate revenue, and this is backwards. A demo sell build approach flips this completely, and it's how I build minimum viable runways for all my products using 3 stages. Stage 1 is business model demand validation. This is where you prove that customers will pay for your product without building it. You do this by testing offers, not products, validating your pricing model, and securing enough customers from early adopters. Stage 2 is customer-funded development. This is where you use the committed revenue you got from your early adopters to fund building only what those customers have already validated that they need and nothing more. This is also, by the way, the best way for defining what actually goes into your minimum viable product. Testing with motivated paying customers is also, by the way, the best way for validating your business model at small scale. And once you can repeatedly deliver value to these motivated early adopters, you progress to stage 3, where you systematically then scale your business model to product market fit and beyond. This is where you go from an early MVP that works with dozens of customers to a repeatable and scalable business model. Now notice the order: runway first, then product, then scale. Most founders try to do this backwards and run out of money before they figure out their business models. So let me show you how this works in practice with Steve, who was building a virtual reality platform. Steve's original plan was to spend 6 months to build his VR platform and then start looking for customers. He had saved away $100,000 of his hard-earned money, and his calculus was to use half of this towards building and the other half towards validation. The problem, of course, is that most startups seldom go as planned, and building a big product this way always takes longer than we expect. Steve wasn't ready to launch at the 6-month mark and delayed launch by another 3 months. When he started showing his customers his product at the 9-month mark, he was met with a lukewarm response. Steve then decided to pivot to a different direction, but he had burned through most of his savings, and so he was forced to take on part-time work to pay the bills. This was not ideal, but at least he was still pushing his vision forward. Then a few months later, a funded competitor with the exact same idea launches, and Steve has his oh crap moment. That's when he reaches out to an old advisor, Mary, who tells him point blank that he can't compete against full-time founders while working part-time. You need to break away from consulting and go all in on your startup, but first you need to prove your business model can generate the runway to support that leap. She helped Steve create a Mafia offer, an offer so compelling his customers couldn't refuse, using 3 components. A strong, unique value proposition he landed on after conducting dozens of deep customer interviews, a credible demo that was much smaller and simpler than what he was originally building on his own, and the most important bit was revenue commitment from his early adopters for a white-glove 90-day paid pilot program with a strong money-back guarantee. Steve presented this Mafia offer to 15 qualified architects, and 12 out of them said yes. That was $5,000 a month in committed recurring revenue, which equated to $180,000. He used these funds to then hire additional help and build exactly what his customers had prepaid for. But the real breakthrough in all of this was that Steve now had proof that his business model could generate repeatable revenue. If he could deliver value to these 12 customers over the next 90 days, he could use their testimonials and referrals to continually bring on more customers over time. So that's the concept of the minimum viable runway. In the next section, I'm going to share my top 3 runway killers. Based on working with thousands of founders, I've identified the 3 biggest runway killers that prevent founders from reaching their minimum viable runway goal. The first one is the perfect product trap. This is where you think that you need a perfect product before you can generate revenue. The reality is that customers buy promises of better outcomes, not perfect products. And better outcomes are relative to their current status quo, not your idealized version of better, which is often a much higher bar to meet. Runway killer number 2 is pricing procrastination. This is where you defer pricing decisions until after you build. The reality is that pricing is one of the riskiest assumptions in your business model and something you should test first, not last. And finally, runway killer number 3 is premature optimization. This is where you try to scale before you've proven your minimum viable runway model. And the reality here is that you should first prove you can systematically generate 10K of revenue or whatever number that makes sense for your minimum viable runway per founder, and then worry about scaling to 100,000 or beyond. Do you see the common thread here? All 3 of these runway killers have the same exact root cause: focusing on the product before focusing on the business model. The minimum viable runway approach forces you to validate your business model first using the systematic approach I outlined earlier, where you start by step 1, setting your minimum viable runway target. Then step 2, assembling a compelling offer using a mafia offer campaign. And finally, step 3, securing tangible commitments from enough customers to fund that runway. This approach gives you 3 critical advantages. First, you prove demand before supply. Second, you get customer-funded development. And third, you build confidence in your business model before you bet everything on it. Now, if you're thinking this makes sense, but where do I actually start? That's the right question. Most founders know they need a solid business model, but they don't have a systematic way to design and stress test one before they start building. That's exactly the problem Steve faced before he got those $180,000 in commitments. Steve's commitments happened because he followed a systematic approach: business model design first, customer discovery second, and runway validation third. Most founders skip the foundation and wonder why their offers fall flat. That's why I created the BMD Challenge. It's a systematic process that takes you from idea to stress-tested business model, including the runway feasibility framework I just showed you. Over 50,000 founders to date have used the system to validate their business models before building, and the link is below if you want to get started on that. The minimum viable runway stress test is one of the 7 stress tests I cover in the BMD Challenge. Next week, I'll preview the other 6. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.